Good afternoon, everybody. Today is 6th July. This date maybe would be meaningless for most of my listeners, but for me 6th of July is an important date. And that's why today I've decided to record a short video in English to share my memories, to pass on the memories I have of Malawi briefly. Malawi is not a very well-known country worldwide. Maybe in the English-speaking part of the world or in the English-speaking part of Africa, maybe some people know about Malawi, but most people don't know about Malawi, especially in the French-speaking world. Malawi has played a very big role in my life because when I was 30 years old, I was assigned to Malawi by WFP World Food Programme. That was in 1990. I was, the year before, I had worked for the same WFP in South Sudan in the middle of the war. South Sudan, which was still part of Sudan at the time, but which was torn by the war between the SPLA and the Khartoum government. So when I arrived in Malawi in February 1990, I found a very green and peaceful country. It was the absolute opposite of what I had just experienced in South Sudan. But very rapidly I discovered more about Malawi. Malawi was at the time under the rule of a life president, a president for life, who had been in power since even before independence, Dr Hastings Kamuzu Banda, a medical doctor. And Malawi, the Malawi I discovered at the time, was a unique country. It was, I would say, almost cut off from the rest of the world, because at the time we did not have internet, we did not have mobile phones, not even satellite phones, and the only way to communicate with the outside world was through the post office and through landline telephones. Malawi was ruled like a private property, ruled by the life president, who was more than 90 years old when I arrived in Malawi. Dr. Kamuzu Banda had left the country when he was still a young boy. He walked, according to the official story, he walked to what is now called Zimbabwe, Southern Rhodesia, and South Africa, where he met an American Protestant missionary who sponsored him to go and study in the US, where he trained as a medical doctor. After that, he went to the UK and discovered that his US medical studies could not allow him to work in the British Empire. So he started again his medical studies in Scotland, became a medical doctor for the second time in Scotland, and then practiced medicine in the suburb of London for many years. He had completely lost his roots with what was not called Malawi at the time, but Nyasaland. In the late 50s, young nationalist leaders in Nyasaland had started the struggle for independence. But before independence, they wanted to break up the so-called federation, because the British were trying to form a federation between Nyasaland, Northern Rhodesia, which is now called Zambia, and Southern Rhodesia, that is Zimbabwe. And Southern Rhodesia was dominated by people of European origin, of English or Scottish origin, while in Iceland there were very few Europeans living in Iceland. So the Africans in Iceland were afraid of changing a colonial rule with another colonial rule and to be dominated by the white minority of southern Zimbabwe. That's why they struggled against the idea of a federation with the two neighbors. But those young leaders needed a wise man, an old man, an elderly man to lead the struggle in order to be respected by the traditional chiefs throughout the country. And they heard that there was an old, maybe younger than me at the time, but still old for them, old medical doctor originating from Iceland, there in England. They contacted him. When the Gold Coast became independent, Dr. Banda left the UK to practice medicine in Ghana, and he kept contact with those young leaders and finally agreed to go back to his country and lead the struggle. The propaganda at the time had made him like I would say like a kind of messiah. They were waiting for the return of the messiah to free the country from the colonial rule. And that's what happened. For the following 5 years, Dr. Banda and the young leaders struggled against the British colonial rule. At one stage, they were arrested and sent to jail in Gweru, in southern Rhodesia. And finally, an agreement was found. The idea of a federation was forgotten, and autonomy was granted, and elections took place, and the party led by Dr. Banda won most of the seats, and Dr. Banda became Prime Minister in 1963. 1964, Malawi became independent on 6th July. Within a few weeks after independence, Dr. Banda started to get rid of the young leaders who had called him back in order to impose his own personal rule. Some of them ran away into exile, others were killed, others were jailed, and that's how the dictatorship started, Dr. Banda's dictatorship. In 1966, Nyasaland, which was now called Malawi, became a republic. 1971, the party, the only party of Malawi, the Malawi Congress Party, appointed Dr. Banda life president, and he ruled the country in a very paternal way, talking to his people like if he were talking to children, always referring back to the struggle for independence, to the struggle against what he called the stupid federation. So when I reached Malawi in 1990, that was still the system I found. It was very difficult to talk with the Malawians. They were all scared of talking. We could hardly talk about any issue apart from the weather. There was no identity card system in Malawi. What was replacing the ID was Malawi Congress Party card. If you didn't have the card, you could not get a job, you could not enter the market, you could not board a bus, you could not enter the hospital. And the membership had to be renewed every year. The young pioneers, that is the kind of militia of the party, was going from house to house to get the people to renew their membership. Pregnant women had to buy 2 cards, one for them and one for the babies, to the unborn babies. There was only one radio network, that was Malawi Broadcasting Corporation, MBC. Only one daily newspaper belonging to a company which was a property of the president. No outside information. The radio, there was no television at the time. Malawi was one of the last countries to get television. Every time the president was moving around, huge crowds had to converge to the place where he was going, or on the roadside if he was going to the airport, to cheer him. Especially the school children. The school children were always mobilized, and also the women. The women were really the backbone of the regime. There was the Women League of Malawi, and those poor women were ferried from one end of the country to the other to go and cheer and dance for the president whenever he was traveling within the country, or at the airport when he was leaving the country or coming back from elsewhere. I nicknamed Malawi a poor North Korea, because the political system was as closed as the one in North Korea. There was no any space of freedom in Malawi. People were very scared of talking. Some people who were talking too much were disappearing. The society, the civil society, was dominated by the party, by the one party, the Malawi Congress Party. The president, as I said, was very old when I reached Malawi, and obviously he was becoming senile. He was always repeating the same thing in his endless speeches whenever he was traveling in the country, or whenever he was talking on the radio. I can still hear his voice talking to his people as if he were talking to young children. And finally, the rest of Africa was moving towards multi-party democracy, but Malawi appeared to be isolated from that tendency, immune from that tendency. But in 1992, a very brave man called Chakufa Chihana spoke against the regime. He was arrested, and that was the beginning of the end. And also, I think even before Chakufa Chihana, the role of the bishops, of the Catholic bishops, is to be underlined. They published a pastoral letter, I think it was for Easter 1992, where they denounced the excesses of the regime, the abuses of the regime, and asked for political freedom. So that was the beginning of the end. Dr. Banda, or the people who were pulling the ropes, the strings behind him, organized a referendum to counter the idea of multi-party democracy, and asked the people whether they would approve the one-party system or multi-party democracy. And to the surprise of the MCP leaders, despite the lack of freedom, especially freedom of speech, the referendum was won by the multi-party advocates. So that was the beginning of the end. And in 1994, he was almost 100 years old when when Dr. Banda had to run for president, as the constitution had been scrapped and he was no longer the life president but just an ordinary president, and had to run for president again, and he was defeated. So that's how the regime ended. One of the last dictatorships to collapse when the wind of multi-party democracy was blowing throughout Africa. So all of this, I've been the witness of that. I've been the witness on the one hand of the one-party system during the first 2 or 3 years of my presence in Malawi, and then the transition towards democracy. That's something I cannot forget. I cannot forget the years of dictatorship. Can you imagine? A woman in Malawi could not wear short skirts, their knees had to be covered. Men had to have short hair, long hair were banned. There were so many things which were not allowed to do. Those years I will never forget them. So that's why today I think of Malawi, because it is the 6th of July, it is the 61st anniversary of independence. I left Malawi at the end of '93. I went to Mozambique, but I returned to Malawi often after that. And in 2007, I think, I was sent to Malawi again I was sent by an NGO, and I spent 2 years. The first time I was in Malawi, I was in Blantyre. The second time I was in Lilongwe, and I found a completely different country. Malawi was free. There were so many daily newspapers, weekly newspapers. There was television, private radio channels. People were able to talk badly about the president, or to draw ridiculous cartoons of showing the president in the newspapers. That was something completely different. But still, in Lilongwe they built a beautiful mausoleum for Dr. Kamuzu Banda, because he died a few years after leaving power. He died in a South African hospital. But Malawi had changed completely. And now you can even find people who are missing those years, because they say that during Banda's years, life was cheaper, it was easier to find a job, and security was better. It's just the same in every country which has become free again. You always find people missing the years of dictatorship, because they think life was better with a strong leadership. So I don't know what is, it's up to the people of Malawi to decide and to say what was better for them. But it is true that I found a different people when I was in Malawi for the second time. So it is those memories I wanted to share with you today in English, especially for my English speaking listeners, because I think the experience I had in Malawi in those years, in the early 90s, were quite unique, and that's what I wanted to share with you today. If you have any question, please write your questions as comments, and I will answer your questions. I could even make another video to give you more details about what was life under Dr. Kamuzu Banda in Malawi in those years. Thank you. Bye-bye.